What we're doing tonight, probably 20 degrees, that's not important, I'm just whining. But, so here's what happened. I picked this truck up from not Colorado, I got it from Maryland, and it's very rusted, very rusty. The frame is pretty scaly. It's only got 80,000 miles, it runs great, but I was towing my boat with it and, you know, going to the launch ramp and stuff, and then when I came back from boating for the weekend, I noticed a puddle underneath the differential. There was fluid dripping out, and it was on the, because it was on a slope. And I looked underneath there and I noticed this breather vent tube had come off. It was completely split for about an inch or two up, and it had just fallen off, and it was kind of floating here, and this breather tube was open. And then I realized when I was launching the boat, it would have been underwater. Now I saw gear oil dripped out all over the floor, on the ground in the launch ramp, but water would have definitely been above this point. So I had a feeling some water had gotten into the diff. And then after that, I towed it home. It sounded okay. Drove it around for a bit, and then I started noticing some grinding when I was taking hard turns from a stop. As you accelerate, if you've got the wheel totally turned, this is a limited slip diff. I heard some grinding or some vibrations coming from the back, the rear end. So I assumed I had water in there, and I had to pretty much get that out immediately. But I went to take out the bolt, and the fill bolt was completely, well, that's one thing you always want to make sure you do. Take out the fill bolt before you drain everything out of the fluid, because once you drain the fluid out, if you can't get the fill bolt out, then you're kind of screwed. Can't put fluid back in it. I went to take that out, and of course that was rusted, completely gone, so I had to grind off that and weld a nut to the back side of that bolt, and then I was able to get it out. And when I did, fluid immediately started draining out, and water actually came out. Fluid came out first, then water and fluid. So I knew at that point I was already above the fill level on the backside, and there was water in it. So I zipped off all these bolts, cracked the case, bunch of water and fluid came out. Didn't look like too much clutch material from the limited slip clutches, but it didn't look great. There was a lot of water in there. So I ended up taking all that off, scraping it off, cleaning up the cover, putting the cover back on, used my same welded on nut on the backside, and then filled everything back up with 3 quarts of 75 weight 140 with limited slip additive for this rear end. And then I took it on a trip to pick up another car. And I noticed when I was picking up the trailer, I looked and there was diff fluid all on the ground here. So a couple things, I figured maybe I just didn't seal it good enough with the gasket maker because it was below freezing, even though I had heaters running on it the whole time. But then I noticed the fluid was all the way up here. It was all sure it was dripping off of here, but it didn't just start right here. It started all the way up here. And if you look very closely, if you zoom in, you can see there's a little dent in here. And if you can really feel it if you run your screwdriver over it, and you can actually see diff fluid leaking. So now what I realized had happened is this diff cover actually welded or rusted completely through. I guarantee you if I poke hard enough right here, it's very squishy. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much going through it right now just by tapping it. That's where my leak is coming from. And it mainly happens when I'm moving. Over the course of an hour-and-a-half drive, I lost a full quart out of this. If I pushed very hard, I guarantee you I could go right through this cover. Not a whole lot of point there to it, but it's totally rusted through. So I went to the junkyard, I grabbed the new cover and a new fill bolt in the backside. We're gonna bust all this off. I'm gonna scrape off the gasket maker I just put on. It shouldn't be too firmly heated on there. And then I have an actual gasket. I'm not using gasket maker this time around. I bought a $4 gasket. This way I don't have to use blow dryers and heat things up so it can dry. Jeez, it's just pouring out of it now. At this point, since the truck is at a slope like this, the back end is down, the fluid level's above this hole, whereas typically it doesn't sit above this hole, but it's above it right now so you can see it pouring out. So that sucks to waste the 3 quarts, but we're gonna take all these bolts out. They are 1/2 inch. I'm gonna zip them out with an impact right now. I know they're loose, I just put them on 2 days ago. We're gonna take them all off. I'm gonna pry this off. We're gonna get rid of all the fluid. I'll scrape it off. We'll put on a new gasket. We'll put the new cover back on that's not rusted through. And I'm gonna keep my rear end tabs that say what gears I have. Limited slip 355, that's fine. And then we'll fill it back up from the front side. So that's the process. All right, so when I'm doing this, I'm going to leave the very top one in just a little bit so that when I go and pry this off, the whole thing doesn't just fly away and end up falling on the ground and dumping a bunch of diff fluid on me. We're gonna leave this one somewhat threaded in. And woo! All right, I'm gonna get a screwdriver. But before we do that, take a look over here. Go to the backside real quick and take a gander at this. This is what I had to do. Here's the fill bolt. It's normally just a 3/8 drive, but I had to weld this 7/8 nut to it just to be able to get to it because it's totally rusted. So that's what we're working with back here. But I have a new one from the junkyard as well, so we're all good. Try to be very careful about this so I don't feel like getting gear oil all over myself. The stuff smells. Oh! Stuff smells terrible. And that is, that's like 3-day-old fluid. Guess it could be worse. And we're gonna let the rest of this catch. You know, I think I did pretty good. I didn't get any on me. My goodness. Fantastic. All right, got it. Now, I'm cleaning up all the gasket surfaces, and then a quick trick is use a brass brush to scrape off these areas where the gasket surface is still kind of on there. It makes really quick work of it, and it gets it pretty darn clean. And then once you've got most of it taken off, or to a shine, you can come back with brake clean and clean off all the grease, and that'll get this pretty much perfectly clean every time and ready to either use gasket maker or a gasket. Cut it. With a razor blade, this is the diff from the junkyard that does not have a rust hole in it. And we're taking all the old RTV off. And we're gonna do the same to the differential side up here on my axle as soon as it stops dripping. I may have to level the car out though because it's on a car slanted like this, so all the diff fluid just keeps pooling and puddling out, and we need that to be relatively dry when we mount it up. But you don't have to use RTV for this stuff. You can, most people do. That's what I did the first time around. But since it's below freezing here in Colorado, it's really hard to get RTV to cure. So if you're in the summertime, great, use that, but this gasket was $4.50. So I didn't feel like dealing with the heat again. So I'm just going to use a gasket. All right. Alright, so we're going to buzz in all of these bolts. Well, I'm going to do these by hand actually. I'm not going to use the impact to actually torque them down. It does not take much on this, probably. Actually, I'm not even going to say anything. I have no idea. Look up the torque specs. I'm just going to do it hand tight by feel. And then we're going to replace the fill bolt on the other side with a fresh one from a junkyard. And we're gonna call it a day on this rear end, refill it with 75 weight 140 with limited slip additive. And that's it. See, no more hole. Isn't that neat? All right. So here's the side-by-side comparison. That's the stock one. This is what I had to create. There's a magnetic piece on the bottom to collect shavings from the diff, but I ended up welding some stuff to whatever metal was left on the top of this. So here's the new one. Gonna thread this in so we don't have to deal with that 7/8 bolt anymore. And, well, we didn't fill it up yet, so we know it does thread in. We're gonna leave it right there, barely even hand screwed in, because I don't have fluid yet. So, trash pile. That's it, you can cut it.
Okay.
Here's what we're using. Same price at Walmart as Walmart's brand, so I just went with Valvoline. 75 weight, 140. It says it on the back of the diff tab. Contains limited slip additive. That's what you want to make sure you have. Otherwise, you can get the stuff without the limited slip additive. You just have to put that in there yourself. And here's our fill hole. So pretty straightforward here. Should take about just about 3 quarts to fill this thing up when it's dry. All right. Cut. And when you're going.
Going.
All right, so just as a recap, I got this truck from Maryland. It was very rusty. I drove it back across the country. It did great, but as soon as I took it boating, I noticed a big puddle and the diff breather tube had cracked and fallen off. So when I backed it into the lake, it had gotten a bunch of water in it. The symptoms were, when I'm at a dead stop and you turn the wheel as if you're parking and then you're going to leave the parking lot, you start the car up, you turn the wheel one way or the other, and then you start to accelerate, you hear a shuddering from the rear end, and you can feel it. It's like a heavy vibration almost, and it really is only there as you're accelerating. Once you straighten the wheel back out, it goes away. That was my symptoms. There was a ton of water in here, so that's what we had to do. And it was fixed. The shuddering pretty much went away. Once I did this the last time around, I just ended up having a hole in my diff cover, so I had to replace that. So at this point, we know getting the water out of there, replacing the fluid, solved our issues.